iiyama are really trying to bring out some more affordable gaming monitors out there on the market, but they still haven't really worked out how to name their products. Today we're looking at the iiyama G-Master GB2745QSU-B1 Black Hawk. Yes indeed, it is absolutely ridiculous as a product name. Now nonetheless, it sports a flat 27-inch IPS panel that has a resolution of 1440p and a refresh rate of 100Hz. It also has support for adaptive sync technologies. Now at the time of filming and in the UK, it can be found for roughly £190. So in this review you can see if it's actually worth its price tag and how it compares to some of its competitors. So kicking things off, it's very positive because I had its input lag objectively tested at 0.1 milliseconds. Indeed, it does fare very well, but so do other monitors that I've recently tested. Subjectively speaking, while playing a game such as Counter-Strike 2, I felt that my mouse inputs were responding absolutely phenomenally well. However, the same couldn't be quite said about its overall response time. Now, the response time is linked with the different overdrive modes that you can select via the monitor's OSD. You have got level off, 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5, 5 being the maximum. Now here, where you go up the overdrive modes, the pixel responsiveness of the monitor will get better, but you will get a worse visual experience with inverse ghosting. Now for me to demonstrate it, I'm using the OSRTD tool. Now first off, with the overdrive set to off, the average initial time, which translates to the average G to G, which is often quoted by manufacturers, sits at a stonkingly high 13.82 milliseconds. As we go to the level 1 mode, this drops down to 11.73 milliseconds. As we go to level 2 mode, it drops down to 9.91 milliseconds. As for level 3 mode, which might be recommended for certain gamers, it goes to 8.93 milliseconds. However, the one that I would actually actively recommend is the level 4 mode, which is average initial time sitting at 8 milliseconds. Now that's actually not all that impressive, specifically if you look at the percent in window just above it, which sits at 76%. In other words, this monitor is not really hitting its refresh rate of 100Hz. Now you have also got the level 5 mode, where you can see that the percent in window has increased at 83%, and with the average initial time dropping down to 7.03 milliseconds. But unfortunately here, the RGB overshoot does become a little bit more noticeable, specifically towards lighter transitions. Effectively over here, I'm trying to say that the level 4 mode is the one that I'd recommend, but the overall average G to G time, and also from my own subjective testing while playing a game like Counter-Strike 2, I felt that the monitor was a little bit slow to respond. And unlike some other modern monitors out there on the market, even at its price point, I do feel that it's quite disappointing. Now furthermore, you can see over here the visual experience with the UFO ghosting test, and between the different level modes you'll be hopefully able to notice that there is a little bit of inverse ghosting on the level 5 mode, although it does become a lot more pronounced in certain shooter games. Now you do also have an MBR mode, and here you've got 7 different level increments that you can adjust from. This will lock the overall brightness that one can attain, but will give you a much clearer image. And indeed over here, when it comes to the overall motion clarity with MBR enabled, it is certainly impressive. However, with it disabled, the overall motion clarity of this IPS panel is nothing to really shout about. Now I should point out that MBR cannot be used simultaneously with adaptive sync technologies, and also cannot be used at 60Hz if you so wish to use it, for example on a console. Now this does actually perfectly bring me on to AMD FreeSync and NVIDIA G-Sync, and I was able to test the latter because I've got an RTX 3080, and when connected over DisplayPort to the monitor, I was able to run the NVIDIA Pendulum demo without incurring any sort of flickering or black screen issues. Furthermore, I was able to run the monitor with the NVIDIA G-Sync at 1440p at 100Hz on a game like Destiny 2. I didn't incur yet again any sort of issues, and gave me a tear-free gaming experience. But yet again, I did feel that the monitor was a little bit sluggish, even in terms of dialing up its overdrive mode. I should also mention that there is no support for HDR, so something worth considering. Now moving on, I should have a quick word for console gamers, and I had the monitor tested at 60Hz. With the overdrive set to level 3, the average initial time sat at 7.91 milliseconds, and is the recommended mode if you were to get this monitor and use it with a console. The reason I say that is because when you go to level 4 mode, which is not even the maximum level of level 5, you can see that the RGB overshoot becomes a bit too noticeable, while the average initial time only drops slightly to 7.44 milliseconds. As for the overall motion clarity and the inverse ghosting, here you can see yet again the UFO ghosting test, but at 60Hz with level 3 and level 4 mode. Now the monitor's gaming performance is somewhat mediocre, so what about when it comes to the image quality? Well, here it's got a flat IPS panel that has a 27-inch form factor and a matte coating to it. Now there is no dedicated sRGB mode that you can select via the monitor's OSD, although the monitor does not have a wider color gamut. Now using the user mode preset and not the iColor standard mode preset, which actually locks a bunch of different settings, I put it through my calibrators. And here you'll be able to see that the gamut coverage was tested at 94%, with the gamut volume tested at 107.2%, at least in comparison to the sRGB standard. As for the average LTE, it sits at 2.39 and a maximum of 7.49, which means it's not exactly the most color accurate monitor out there on the market and won't be suitable for serious image editing work or video grading. Its tested contrast ratio, however, was pretty impressive for an IPS panel, tested at 1302:1, with the measured white point sitting relatively close to the 6504 Kelvin target at 5983 Kelvin at 100%. As for its gamma curve, it sits relatively close to the 2.2 standard, but could have been a little bit better. So next up we get onto brightness, and here I recorded a peak of 300 nits, and it got all the way down to 79 nits, showing good sort of range. I was able to run it at roughly 70 to 80% brightness in a bright sunlit room, and in a completely pitch black room I found it perfectly usable, although it's not as dim as some of its competitors. As for the MBR levels, you've got different brightness levels, and this will lock it at said levels, and it will get all the way down to 92 nits. Past the overall luminance figures, we should talk about brightness uniformity, and here on my tested panel, which I appreciate is somewhat lottery, it actually did fare pretty well. The same could be also said about the overall backlight bleed, which I found perfectly acceptable even while playing darker movies or games. But of course, if you're susceptible to this, or you're going to be predominantly using it for watching darker scenes, then you might want to consider a TN or a VA panel altogether. Past all these tests, let's talk about its build quality, and here it's got a three-side borderless design with a relatively thin bottom bezel. The stand itself is also pretty nicely designed, at least in my opinion, and it's also very sturdy. It provides you height, tilt, pivot and swivel adjustments. It's also great to see that you can rotate it both ways. Now the stand itself of course can be replaced if you so wish with a VESA compatible stand, allowing you to place it on a monitor arm or a multi-monitor setup. Now there are a few physical buttons located underneath the monitor at the right hand side, and these are for you to access the monitor's OSD. It's actually pretty comprehensively laid out, although I would have wished that some of the menus were a little bit more grouped together, for example the image quality and the color segment. Nonetheless, it's a very small point to make, and I've got no real complaints in this department. Now the monitor also has got two 2-watt speakers built in, which will suffice for basic music listening or indeed gaming, but I'd highly suggest you to get a DAC, headphones or indeed a headset. Now in terms of connectivity, you have got a 3.5mm jack output, which allows you to connect up your headphones directly into the monitor, and you've also got two USB Type A ports, which can be utilized if you do plug in the USB Type A to Type B cable, which is provided within the box. As for the other ports, you have got a singular HDMI 2.0 and a singular DisplayPort 1.2, and these will actually give you the access of the native resolution and refresh rate of 1440p at 100Hz. So with all that in mind, it brings me on to my verdict. And here, when it comes to the overall positives that you can take away from this review, is that you're getting an affordable 1440p monitor, which has actually got a very low input lag, a comprehensively laid out OSD, and a nice build quality. However, when it comes to the overall responsiveness of the panel, it's actually pretty poor. The fact that it emits HDR or indeed a high refresh rate over 100Hz will be disappointing to certain users. And the fact that it's not also pinpoint color accurate in the sRGB color space means that it might not be actually suitable for those people using it for serious image editing work or video grading. Frankly, it's probably just useful for those people who are casual gamers. But even if you do fall in that category, I'll suggest spending a little bit more money and going for one of the alternatives that I'll be linking down description below. Now I'd be curious to know what you make of this monitor down in the comment section below, and if you would purchase it over some of the alternatives that I've mentioned. Now if you have enjoyed this detailed independent review, definitely do consider dropping a like, subscribing and hitting that bell notification, all of which would be greatly appreciated and allows me to continue delivering honest reviews like this one. As such, I've been Totally Dubbed, and I'll hopefully see you in the next one. Take care of yourselves, and goodbye.